Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Maureen, and today I want to do a sew along with you. So I made this cape from Vogue pattern 9288. I am so excited about it. So a little bit about this cape and this fabric. So I'll be honest with you, I bought this fabric back in October from Fine Fabrics in Atlanta. And originally I thought I was gonna make like this really pretty, dainty, double-breasted blazer, and then my plans changed. And I decided that I wanted to make a really pretty cape, and I had this pattern that honestly I hadn't really even looked at in a long time, and I just decided to make it. And so it is absolutely gorgeous, if I do say so myself. And I just took like so much care with this pattern. Like in this tutorial, you're really gonna learn like about bias binding, your seams, doing like satin finishes. I did a lot of hand sewing, which if you know anything about me, you know that I truly despise hand sewing. But I was really determined to complete this project, to complete this look, and my patience was rewarded, and I am so excited. So you're gonna learn so many different things, mainly how to sew with wool. So with this pattern specifically, I actually widened my stitch length from that regular 2.5 that you normally see on your machine. I think most times I had it at a 3.5, sometimes at a 4 if I was going over thicker portions, and up to a 5 when I was top stitching. And then it was very intentional for me to use the satin facing in this pattern, just because when you have wool on top of wool, it can spell disaster for your machine, and it can spell disaster for your project. And so I just took a lot of care with this, and so I was very passionate about it. I know it's an older pattern. I still wanted to make the tutorial just out of like pure love and adoration of this pattern. So aside from learning different techniques and just getting adjusted to sewing with wool, I do want to mention that you're probably also going to want to take a look at which needle you're using. I believe I used either like a top stitch needle, something that was really thick. I can't remember which one it is, but I know I had no needles breaking in the making of this project at all. And then the other thing I want to mention about this pattern is I did make a few modifications based on my personal preference. All of the views have these patch pockets. I decided not to have any patch pockets, and it's not because I'm against pockets. It's just that I didn't think that it really belonged on this particular cape. And then the other thing that I did that was different, I want to say, was that I moved one of the buttons over, and you'll see it in the tutorial. I moved one of the front buttons over just because it seemed like it was going to be an issue in wearing and just in the construction of it. But we'll talk about all of that later. I hope you guys enjoy the tutorial. I'll see you at the end.
Okay, so the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to cut out our pattern pieces. And so I am starting with the largest pieces first, and I'm using my electric scissor, which you guys know that I love. And this electric scissor is just working wonders on this really thick wool, so I'm really glad I chose to cut with it. Okay, so now that I'm finished with my outer pieces, I am going to use a satin polyester that I picked up from Hobby Lobby for my facings and just some of my inner pieces. I feel like this is going to make my sewing experience so much easier with the wool. Another thing with this pattern is that it is extremely important to mark all those dots, mark all those notches, because there are a lot of connecting pieces that are just really unassuming, and it's just going to be important later on that all of those are transferred over. Okay, so we're going to start with pattern piece number 5, and we are going to take the center back and we are going to sew that right sides together, making sure that those notches add up. And I'm definitely going to be using my wonder clips for this project because the fabric is really, really thick and I would hate to lose a pin in there for sure. Okay, and next we are working on our side panels, and that's pattern piece number 6. And so we're going to take those shoulder seams, those curves right there, and we are going to connect those to our back piece. And we are once again going to use those really great wonder clips, and we are going to sew all the way down and take this to our machine and then come back to our table and continue with the next step. Okay, so go ahead and press those seams open. If you are not working with wool and if you're working with some other type of fabric, you can go ahead and finish these seams. This part is going to be optional. I am using a single wide bias tape to do some bias binding on all of the seams. It is an extra step that can be considered tedious, but with this, I just want it to be so luxe, and so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So if you've never done bias binding, first you are going to pin your bias tape to your seam, just like how you see here. Then you're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance and you're going to sew that tape to your seam allowance that is on the cape. Next, go ahead and press away from the seam allowance in that direction. And what you're going to do is, once that is pressed really good, fold it under just like that. And then you're going to take your wonder clips and you are going to pin all the way down from top to bottom. And it's okay to have a little bit of slack on the edge of the seam and at the top of the seam. I actually prefer this because bias tape does stretch, and so I would rather have more bias tape that I can just cut off later than to have not enough bias tape at the front end. So once you pin this down, we're going to take this back to our machine and we're going to top stitch this as closely to the edge as possible, making sure to catch that underside on the seam there. And it's okay if that seam with the bias is not finished underneath. This is actually the traditional method of doing it. I have seen some people actually take a serger to their bias tape. I just didn't feel like it was necessary to do that step. So once you have your seams done, you are finished with that step. Go ahead and do it on all of those seams there. Next, we're working with pattern piece number 2, which is going to be your front panel. So go ahead and stay stitch the top of this, starting with the center front and working your way outwardly. And then go ahead and take this top part and match those notches. And I'm actually using pins for this because it is a very small piece of fabric and I feel like I really wanted accuracy with this. And go ahead and match up your edges there. And we're going to take this to our sewing machine and use a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to sew this down. And once you sew it down, go ahead and press those seams up towards the top. And I would also go ahead and trim some of that excess seam allowance as well. I didn't do it on both pieces of the seam allowance. I just did it on one. I felt like one was good enough. Okay, so now we're going to set this to the side and we are going to work on pattern piece number 4, and that is one of the facings. And so go ahead and take those and stay stitch those at the top, and then go ahead and take this piece right here and make sure you match up your dots, excuse me, from both of those pieces, and we are going to sew those together again, making sure that you pin right there at each dot marking on those pieces. And once you finish pinning, go ahead and take this to your sewing machine, again doing a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on that facing piece right there. And go ahead and give it a good press. And also go ahead and clip in some notches there, just so that it can have a little bit more flexibility when you attach it to the front panel piece later on. All right, so go ahead and grab that front panel piece again, and now we are going to attach the facing part. And I'll be very honest with you, the pattern instructions actually called for a bit of slip stitching, and so I wasn't really sure how that was going to quite work out, and so you're going to see in real time how I figure this out. Go ahead and make sure that those neck pieces up there are actually facing upward when you pin this together. And so the first step to this is we are going to pin this all the way to the bottom, across the top, and back down the other side. And then we will take this to our machine and we will do a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on this piece right here. Okay, so next you're going to trim those edges. You can go ahead and trim the sides, and go ahead and especially trim those corners up there. That way you have a really pointy corner, and then go ahead and grab your point turner and just turn that right side out. Okay, so the pattern instructions call for you to hand stitch all the way down that side, and so I'm actually going to unpick about 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. That way I'm able to do a nicer slip stitch with that, and so I'm going to do that on both sides here. And so I wanted to be transparent and just show you all that. So now I'm going to take this to my machine and create a fold line using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going to press that down, and I am going to pin that, and then I'm going to slip stitch it, and then I'm going to have a snack, and then I'll be back.